coming up.
Some people are like, well, how are you feeling about parenthood? And they're kind of like, some people are just like, oh, everything's so great. Especially like, they give this generic answer that people are supposed to give and whatever. Instead of like BDSM being like, it opens a space for the communication to be like, well, I'm not enjoying it right now. And that's okay that I'm not enjoying it right now. However, can I be open with the people in my support system about what I need?
Hey, y'all.
Hey, mamas.
Welcome back to Raising Mama.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Chelsea.
I'm a divorced mama of 2 toddlers, sharing custody while running my own business.
And I'm a full-time nurse, pregnant with my second baby, and married to a stay-at-home dad.
Join us while we talk about the most pressing issues related to postpartum and new parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by Raising Mama, a bamboo baby brand dedicated to empowering moms during postpartum and raising awareness about maternal mental health. Raising Mama's buttery soft bamboo pajamas aren't just designed to help babies sleep better, they're made to support mothers too. And for every pair sold, a portion of the proceeds is donated to Postpartum Support International. As a thank you for listening, enjoy 20% off your next order with code RaisingMamaVillage at checkout, because we're all in this together.
Hey, y'all.
Hey, mamas.
Welcome back to Raising Mama. Today, we're talking about BDSM. Do you even know what that stands for, Megan?
Honestly, no. But
bondage.
I think you guys are going to love this episode. We just finished talking to Sabia Wade, who was a former dominatrix turned doula. She's also an activist. She's an amazing person, super smart, so many nuggets of wisdom, as I always like saying. And we were like, tell them the story. We were like interviewing her to kind of, we have these like little pre-calls before the show, and we're talking to her about like possible, topics and all of the activism like work that she does. I mean, she's worked with incarcerated women who are, pregnant, giving birth while in prison, and all kinds of stuff. And she's like, actually, I do have this one topic that I did a keynote on once in like San Diego, and it's about kink. And she sent us the like slideshow for it. I was like, yes, we need to do this. So I don't know. What'd you think, Chelsea?
Oh, it was mind blowing. Like Megan was like, okay, so like give me some of the books and like tell me what's going on. If you think that, oh my God, the parallels to postpartum and parenting and being a new mom and using so much of that culture, it's insane. Like I had no idea. So
the tools.
A lot of it's communication, and it's just a whole world we didn't know much about. And now I feel like I have a little glimmer, and I'm kind of wishing I knew more earlier.
I went from like, this sounds spicy to like, okay, I'm hopping on Amazon and I am buying a BDSM book. So anyways, let's go
Without further ado. Here we go.
Before we dive in, hit the subscribe button for more expert insights and honest conversations on Raising Mama podcast.
Today, we're joined by the incredible Sabia Wade, a visionary CEO, author, educator, full spectrum doula, and experienced dominatrix. In this episode, Sabia shares how her world in kink deeply informs her approach to supporting new parents. She explores how understanding consent, power dynamics, and care through the lens of BDSM culture can provide invaluable lessons for navigating postpartum and postpartum parenthood. Sabia's mission is to expand awareness and understanding of reproductive justice and its intersection with all systems through care work, education, and community. Join us as we dive into Sabia's fascinating journey from dominatrix to doula, challenging societal norms and uncovering unexpected parallels that can transform the way we think about care, boundaries, and self-advocacy in parenthood. Welcome!
Hello, y'all. I'm glad we got to meet up again.
Me too. I mean, This one's bound to be a nice and juicy one because I know me and Megan don't know a whole much about it, so I'm really excited to just learn all your
secrets.
Yeah. I was thinking like before we started recording, I was like quickly throwing
makeup on, and I was like, when I think about kink, like the last thing I think about is postpartum. And unless like, you think about how maybe like savage postpartum is, like
Yeah,
maybe that's my
very
only, but maybe that's part of it, right? So
Mhm.
can you just like right off the bat just share about your journey from like the BDSM world to becoming a doula?
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. So I've been a doula. I started doulaing at like 27, 28. I'm 36 now. Maybe I was 26. I don't know. What is time? Nonetheless, but I actually got into like the kink world when I was around 19, 20. So it started because one, I was like, I had my own apartment. I was doing it. Okay. And I was like having like this really good time just in life, right? When you're young, you have no responsibilities, you're broke, it doesn't matter, that kind of stuff. And my one friend, everyone's kind of like in their space of exploring who they are. Like every week, I feel like in your 20s, your friends kind of come with something new, right? So my friend came to me and she was like, yeah, I'm like getting into kink and I have a dom and I'm like her submissive. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like I was like, what are we talking about? And she was like telling me about different things that they would do together and how she would like do these tasks for her and it didn't have a sexual dynamic. So there was no sex happening, but just like this fulfillment that she felt from doing this stuff for her dom. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically too, I was like, oh, this sounds like white people stuff. Like, I don't know what's going on here. This is not quite, I don't know. I don't feel the black part of it yet. So I was like, okay. So one day she was like, you should meet my dom because you're so similar to her. And I was like, okay. And she kept telling me like, you operate as a dom already. Like you operate as a dom. And I just thought of myself as like a spoiled brat, if you will, like I just feel like, and I know that people in my life, like whether it was a romantic dynamic or a friendship dynamic, people that were usually kind of like the boss of the dominant in their space will always be will always be submissive to me, or like. But I just thought that was just like my lore,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I meant that like even in like work relationships, like how men are usually walking around like do chest out, and like the men would be like, "What do you need me to do?" Like I just always had this kind of thing. But I just thought it was like it's Sabia, like giving, praise kink. So nonetheless, I didn't think anything of it. So when I met her dom, I was like, oh, like when I met her, I was like, oh, we are the same person. Like this is my kind of girl. Like this is my kind of friend. And I liked her because she was clear about who she was. She was clear about where she wanted to be soft, where she wanted to be hard. She was clear about what she needed from people. She was clear about telling her submissive, this is what I need to make me happy, right? And also she was clear about caring for that submissive as well, right? Because my friend was receiving a level of care from her that she wasn't getting in other spaces, right? So for me, I was like, well, that's different. So that kind of like blew like this whole thing up of like what I thought kink was and BDSM and all of that, because on TV, the media portrays it as like 50 Shades of Grey, just chains and whips and blah blah blah, and especially like it has to be sex, right? Like it's just like it's always that kind of thing. And I was like, okay. And then from there, I started doing my own kind of adventuring, and I was like, in relationship with submissives that were sexual, non-sexual, romantic, not romantic. And a lot of times it would be a lot of my submissives, majority will actually be hetero, straight men. And they would know, like, first of all, like, I'm as gay as they come. We ain't about to do nothing here. So cut that out. And that's fine though. But it was like an acceptance of that. It wasn't like, usually in those dynamics was like when people feel like it's a sexual dynamic between a man and a woman, it's like you can't even say like, it's a lot of women who feel like I don't even feel empowered to say I'm not interested in that. Right. And so that'd be like the first thing. Like you have to respect the fact that like I'm not interested in that with you. We can do other things. We got fun in other ways. I can, you know, get into your kinks and you can fulfill me in certain ways. And a lot of times I would have a lot of like service subs, which are like people who come and like clean up and do things that she wants to do, like more like house kind of stuff. Because for me, I'm a very much like, I'm not like I can clean the house and stuff, but like that's not my thing. You know what I mean? So like I had like a submissive before where he would come into my house. One, he knew like to go through any door in my house, like my bedroom, any door that I like, any room that I was in, he would have to ask permission, right? Which is like a way of like increasing my safety, right? Especially working with like, I'm 5'3", I'm not a big person, right? Like I have to make sure that you can follow the things that make me feel safe. As well as like when he came in, he knew before we got into like our like playtime, which is like when you're indulging in whatever kink it is. Like he had to clean up my house, clean up my cat litter, wash the dishes, make sure my house was together, and then we can go into whatever. Which is another sign of respect, especially for I think female bodied people, where it's like a lot of times we don't get that kind of thing, right? Like we're supposed to be the person that does all of that. We're supposed to be the caretaker. We're supposed to be the caregiver. We're supposed to, you know, like we're supposed to do that whole thing. So that was like that was like before we even got into anything. In this particular submissive I'm talking about, his fetish, do you want to guess what his fetish was? You'll never guess it.
I don't know, but I'm all ears.
So his fetish was being tickled.
Oh.
Right? His fetish was being tickled because when he was younger, he had a crush on a little girl. The little girl used to tickle him. As he got older, he found out that was like a sexual turn on for him because of this experience that he had with this girl that he liked when he was younger, right? So, but in his life as like this male dominant man, you know, that whole thing, he was like, I don't feel safe, right? Asking the women that I date to do that because I feel like there's gonna be, you know, pushback on that being like, one, that's weird. Two, like you're supposed to be the dominant one. What do you mean you want me to tickle you? Like, what does that look like? And so I literally would like tickle him. And I would do, you know, other like kinky stuff, like maybe like, you know, some bondage, some this, because he's like tickle me till like I can't take anymore, right? And so it becomes like tickling to sometimes like a little bit painful, but he likes that kind of thing. And so for me, I kind of rolled into life, kept doing that, kept like learning about different things. And then in 2015, I became a doula. And I became a doula after working in the medical industry and was kind of like, I want to stay here, but I don't want to be in here. You know what I'm saying? So I found out about doulas living in Philly. I moved to Massachusetts, became a prison birth project doula, working with incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated, people using substances and people in substance abuse recovery. And did that for 2 years voluntarily. And it was just so natural for me to like navigate that space because when I was in a dom space, it was like I had submissives who were like one of my last male submissives, like right before COVID, because when COVID happened, then I was like, oh, listen, I can't be in the room with everybody doing everything, you know what I mean? But like he actually was like a straight male. I mean, yeah, he was a straight male. He had like he had a girlfriend, all that. And he liked to cross-dress, right? But he had never cross-dressed in front of another woman because he was like his partner knew that he was interested, but had never did that in front of her because he was like, I don't want to feel humiliated. Like, I don't know how she's going to react to it. So part of our dynamic was me like picking out stuff for him to wear and him trying it on. We would go out. He would take me out. We would go eat. We would just have some fun. And then like we would go to his house. He would get dressed up. And I would like help him like identify himself as feeling pretty, like what made him feel pretty, right? But he was like, he didn't want his sexuality to be questioned because he's like, I'm straight. I know, like I'm with my partner, but if you put on a dress, right? Common society is like, then you must be something else, right? And another thing that happened with him, which was like just me and the way that I dom, right? Because I'm all about self-improvement. Okay, that's who I am naturally.
Love it.
And so when I went to his house, I was like, it's messy in here. Like, why is it so messy? Like, I'm like, you're a stable young man. You got it together. But like, why is it like this? And he was like, oh, because I never really learned how to clean like that because my mom pretty much always cleaned for me. So I was like, so pretty much when your partner is here, she's the one who's doing all the cleaning. And he was like, yeah. So we started working on that. I started giving him tasks for like, let's clean this area of the kitchen. and it came with rewards, right? Let's clean this area of the kitchen, and then we can buy you something, for your next whatever. So it was just kind of like, it can look so different. And when you learn to like hold space for people in that way, holding space for people that are pregnant who are going through their own feelings about their pregnancy, right? Whether it was desired, not desired, whether they had IVF, whatever. People go through whole experiences with pregnancy, right? Postpartum, there's feelings of happiness, grief, anger, frustration. There's dynamics happening with the partner. People are telling you about life experiences. Sometimes it can go, as deep as abuse or something that's coming up for them about their parenting. Like, there's so many things that could happen. Me holding space as a dom taught me how to hold space as a doula. So people, one, felt like this openness of like, you really don't judge. And I'm like, I'm a human. So I think like there's, antennas that come up with certain things, but I know how to hold it. Right? Like I know how to make space for it. And it's also just like a lot of the couple dynamics, especially that kind of come into postpartum when everyone kind of hates each other. And everyone's not seeing clearly into what the other person is seeing. Like I just like with that one story about the submissive that was his house was messy. I was like, so your partner has to be in charge of this. That's not going to work. Like there's no way. Like you got to learn some of this. So you don't have to learn all of it, but you got to learn some of it so that you're helping your partner with the cleanliness of this house, right? And I think just talking about like what do people need? What is it? What do you feel like you're lacking? Because you and your partner feel like you're spending time together, but you feel like you're not, right? It's not quality time to you. So what does quality mean, right? And they'll say like the sexual dynamics of postpartum, right? Someone wants some type of intimacy, the other person may or may not. Is there a way that we can think about intimacy in a way maybe that's not just regular penis and vagina sex, right? Like, what does that look like? What kind of care do you need after an intimate session? And whether that intimacy is just like we spent time and we had a doula or the grandmother came over to hold the baby and I want intimacy in that hour, like what does that look like, right? And like in BDSM, we talk about that, right? What is aftercare for you? What helps you feel safe? What are the things that you like? What are things that you don't like? It's very clear in BDSM because that's a part of building up to these interactions that I'm talking about. But in regular kind of society, we just kind of do a guessing game. We assume that intimacy means the same as intimacy for you. We assume that if I like to be held after this, you like to be held. Or if I say this, you think it's the same meaning, right? Where BDSM is like, no, let's actually deconstruct a lot of that and really talk about that.
I mean, it sounds like in the BDSM, kink dominatrix world, there's a hell of a lot of communication going on.
Not so much, so exhausting sometimes, but necessary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like a lot of talking.
Yeah. And the goal is to understand people, how they work, fill a need, assert a need. I get it. Like I'm really getting the parallels here.
And also like one of the things of communication is to do your best not to create trauma, right? You also do your best to heal trauma. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people utilize kink, BDSM to be healing. Like they see it as a healing modality, right? Like people have been in a lot of spaces where they haven't been able to say, I need this. And like it's on both sides, the dominant and the submissive, right? Are both talking about their needs, where like in our society it's kind of like the dominant does whatever, submissive kind of accepts it. But like that can be causing trauma, right? So it's like, where do we, especially for like parents, because then you have this baby now, right? So now this third dynamic of someone who doesn't really like in the beginning have much to say other than crying, right? Other than cues, if you will. And now you're also trying to reestablish this new relationship, right? With your partner or your support people, whatever it looks like for your partners. And like BDSM says, like, how can we use this communication to get clear about who you are, who I am, what we need, what we want, right? Because need and want is different. What is a must, what is kind of optional. And also like, how do I learn about what your triggers are, right? So that I don't, accidentally put myself in that space, right? And also, how do I make this a healing experience for you? Like, because most of the time we don't have the ability to just let go, right? And BDSM says, as the dominant, at least for me, right? Because not every dominant is great, not every submissive is great. It can be, but as a dominant, it's like, I want this experience to be as healing for you as it is for me. Because for me, as a dominant, to assert my power and for you to trust me is so healing, especially as a Black woman, because people don't listen to Black women, right? Like we can go to a conversation about that, but like as a Black woman or just as a woman in general, like, oh, I get to say this thing and you trust me, you trust my direction. How many of us really are practicing that?
Right.
Totally. I think it makes sense, everything you're saying. It's like, if you have experience in this BDSM world, basically you have really amped up your communication skills, which builds a space for people to be vulnerable and have trust. And I think that a big part of why people are so afraid, maybe if they don't have this experience, to communicate with their partners after birth is because they don't quite feel that security. And they don't quite feel like they can be vulnerable. And playing all these sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but quiet games, right? Where you're just secretly angry at one another. It's never going to work, right? Like you kind of have to go through the real conversation of like, yeah, you're going to have to learn to clean X, Y,
And
and Z.
the question of like that comes up a lot in postpartum is like, on both sides, for it could be for the birthing person, the partner, whoever, it's like I just don't know, right? I don't know who I am right now. Like when people ask me, like, you may be physically right past the due date for intimacy, right? But it still may feel like I don't know. Like I'm kind of interested, but I'm the same time I'm not interested, right? Like, or some people are like, well, how are you feeling about parenthood? And they're kind of like, some people are just like, oh, everything's so great. Especially like, they give this generic answer that people are supposed to give and whatever. Instead of like BDSM being like, it opens a space for the communication to be like, well, kind of enjoying it right now. And that's okay that I'm not enjoying it right now. However, can I be open with the people in my support system about what I need? Even if I'm not enjoying this piece, right? Because sometimes it's just certain pieces of postpartum where you're just not loving it. But can I ask for somebody to make me a meal to make this a little bit easier? Can I ask for my partner when they get home to do this part of the work that will help me just feel a little bit more supported, right? Like communication and BDSM is like, you also don't have to have the right answers. And you also don't have to have a yes or no. So like one of the things that we practice in BDSM when you're venturing into, a dynamic with somebody, whether it's sexual or not, is like a yes, no, maybe list, right? And like that's like one of my favorite things to do. So you can find like very extensive yes, no, maybe lists. like every kink fetish thing that you can find in the world is on there. But the way that it works is like, let's say if your fetish is tickling, right? Or your kink is tickling, then you could say, then I would like, obviously the submissive I would work with is going to say yes, right? Like that's something I definitely want to do. I'm down for that. Me, it would be a no. Like I'm good. Don't tickle me. Like I'm that. I might throw hands. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then like for somebody else, it might be a maybe, right? And so then it's like, okay, what conversations do we have to have about the maybe? Do you want to try it in this environment at this time? What is the maybe about? Is there something that you need more information on to make that answer a little bit more clear to you? Do you just need more time to figure it out, right? Do you need, right? And I think about that in a postpartum way of like, what if we had a yes, no, maybe list for people who are postpartum?
Right.
Right? Like for some people, it could be like, do you want to hire a cleaning person, right? Because cleaning is now getting, especially got multiple kids. Wow. Like, it's getting hard. So it might be that one partner may say, yes, like me, I'm that partner. I'm like, yes, let's get them in here ASAP, right? And you have like my partner who initially, like we have dogs, we don't have kids, but initially she was like, no, we don't need a cleaning person. Like, why we need, I'm here. Like, I like to clean, right? But then we had a conversation with my therapist about my autism. And the way that my autism shows up is I have to have a very pristine environment. And then she started to realize that my standard of clean is higher than her standard of clean. And it's hard to reach that when she's also her own person, working, having time for herself, right? So now she's like, it went from maybe to yes, right? But it was like, what information did we need to make that decision and come to something that was an agreement?
All right, we're going to pause the show for just a minute because I want to share something personal with you. After having my first baby, I felt completely unprepared for how challenging postpartum life would be. I quickly realized that society just doesn't give moms the support we deserve. That's why I created Raising Mama, to make those early days just a little bit easier. Raising Mama pajamas are made from the softest bamboo fabric, engineered with micro gaps to help babies sleep better and give mamas a much needed boost. The prints feature uplifting messages like, "Mama, I wished for you," and "It's okay to ask for help." Phrases that are meant to prevent those negative thought cycles that so many of us struggle with during postpartum. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want to give you a special 20% off with the code Raising Mama Village. Plus, every time you buy a pair, we donate $1 to Postpartum Support International to support maternal mental health. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now let's get back to the show.
I think it's interesting too, because you said you work a lot, you said, with the prison population, women in prison. So I'm assuming there's, maybe this is a wrongful thing to assume, but I'm assuming there's a lot of drama in there, right? Like there might not
with any situation. I mean, drama everywhere at this point, Lord.
True. But I guess what I'm saying is it's not your like necessarily classic scenario, right? Like this is
for sure.
exactly how I anticipated giving birth and sharing duties and all that stuff. So
am I going to have my baby afterwards? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Right. So I wonder, like, what are the most common things that you do with these types of women to help like ease their way? Like, are there any, I know you said yes, no, maybe list. Like, are there certain things that just you're like, every time I connect with a patient, I'm pretty much saying this, like, do this.
I think the first thing that I would say when I work with anyone across any space, right? Because you can be incarcerated in a prison or you can be incarcerated at home.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, right? And I think like some people can probably feel that, right? Like as parents, as partners, as whatever, like some of us are incarcerated by our own minds, right? Like for me to be this kind of person, I got to have this, I got to look this way, I got to whatever, right? Like if you think about people that go through IVF, right? They go through different fertility treatments. When they have their baby, there's this thing, even when they become pregnant, it's the thing of like, you must be happy about it because you tried so hard to get here. And they become incarcerated by that thought process of like, if I have any grief, if I have any regret, if I have any whatever, I can't express that with anybody because they're going to tell me, well, you've been trying for 5 years. What do you mean? Right. So I think like, I just have an expansive mind about like incarceration. Right. But in that, I feel like the one thing that I always have to tell people and my approach is always saying like, hey, in this space, I want you to be honest. That already, right, is like, right. And most of the time it starts with like, I'm like, hey, how are you? Right. And people give their generic answer because we're all plugged in some kind of way to just like, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm this, or I'm tired. Right. But I'm like, okay, but how are you really? Or I was just asking you to expand on what tired means. Right. Because tired to me, generally, when I say tired, means that I am physically tired. Right. But tired to you, maybe that I'm emotionally tired. I'm spiritually tired. I am, right? Like, what are you tired of? Right?
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of times in those spaces is just getting more depth and asking more and just approaching with curiosity around like, what does that mean to you? And a lot of people will just be like, let me think about that. Right? Let me think, what does that mean to me? What does it mean when I say that I'm tired? What does it mean to have someone even explore what that means for me? So honesty, like exploration, is something I kind of have to preface it with. Like I'm going to ask you questions that maybe seem annoying in the beginning, right? They can seem invasive. And you have the permission to always tell me to shut up. I don't want to share that. Right? It's like even evaluating that, right? Because for me, it's always a power dynamic at play in any relationship, no matter what system, it's always a power dynamic. Like me coming in as a doula, I'm coming as a doula, which in the mind of someone who's pregnant is like I'm an expert on pregnancy, right? I'm an expert on postpartum. I'm an expert on whatever. And I mean, sure, if you want to say that, but that means I'm coming in a power dynamic, right? Like they're coming to me with knowledge, but especially if their first baby, they're like, what is happening? I don't know what's going on, right? Because we're super undereducated about what it means to be pregnant and what it looks like to be pregnant until you're pregnant. People don't see births until they have a baby, right? Like
you have the baby. I'm on my second baby, and it's still not like this is super obvious.
Exactly, right? So it's like even that I have to be clear. Like I say that to my clients in the beginning, hey, you may see me as an expert. I have a knowledge base in this area, but you're the expert of your body, right? You're the expert of you. So we're going to combine that those two things Are we going to create some magic here? But if I say something that does not feel in alignment with you, please tell me, right? It's just opening up these gates of you can jump in at any time. You are autonomous here. If you don't want to tell me something, you don't have to. If something is making you feel unsafe, then get me out of here, right? Like, you have as much power in this space that I do, if not more, right? And I say that because as a dom, I always tell the submissives, you're really the powerful one because you're the one who's letting me play with power. I have to have someone to do that with. I can't just be a dom by myself, right? I can't just dominate nothing. What am I doing? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're allowing me this space of trust. You're allowing me this vulnerability and access, right? And the strength that you show in being submissive and trusting and doing all that, to me, is a super strength, right? Because like I said, in the BDSM world, I'm not submissive, because when my friend was coming to me, like that friend at the beginning, and she was expressing how much vulnerability she was showing, I was like, I was like, you doing what? She just got you laid out like that? You just fine with it? Right? And now I've learned, like, as a dominant, how to express my vulnerability more over years. But I think it's the same thing in like postpartum, and how I talk to people and how I talk to my clients. Is just like reminding them that I have a knowledge base, right? I've seen a lot of things, but they're the expert of themselves, right? And that I have to earn their trust, just like anyone else. Does that make sense? And that sometimes that in itself can be a whole thing, like earn my trust. And I'm like, people should not just inherently trust people if that's not what they feel, right? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm like the doctor of 20 years or I am the, whatever of this many years, right? It's like, I have to show up in a way, like, am I respectful to you? Do I answer your questions? Am I open to feedback? Right? Am I open to you saying no? Right? Am I okay with you saying no? Am I okay you making choices for yourself? Like, these are all things that you have to see in me in order to trust me. It's not just my expertise, it's who I am as a person.
Yeah. I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it, but you were saying how there's power dynamics kind of with everybody, right? You and your clients, you and your submissive youth, whoever. Do you think that within couples, like, there is a power dynamic? Like, do you think there's definitely somebody who's more dom leaning and more submissive leaning? Or do you think that they trade spots, or do they mostly not trade spots? Because my real question is, like, if the listeners are out there and they're wondering, like, I wonder if I'm more this type or this type. Like, is there like telltale signs out there?
And I'm not just thinking about like types necessarily, because I see it as both people are kind of exercising both sides of it while still being part of this like larger dynamic that inevitably will shift, especially like two partners that are together for a long time, jobs change, circumstances change, injuries, illnesses, all kinds of stuff. So you're constantly navigating that. And I feel like, at least from what you're saying, trust almost seems like the number one thing.
That part, for sure.
Because without that,
I think trust and like really testing like your attachment, right? Like what, and I think we can get into like a whole conversation about detachment, right? Like, and I like really lean into Buddhism as part of my spirituality, but like, I think trust is super important in any dynamic, right? And then I think that people have, like, I would say my general personality type is I'm a dominant person, right? And it's like nurture versus nature in there. Like, I think that's who I am. I'm also from Jersey. I'm also like, intersectionality. Like, I'm a Black woman. Like, I have to, like, when I have not been in spaces that were trustworthy for me and I was on a more submissive side, I was usually in the space of not like in a healthy space. But then there's also spaces where like my partner, who definitely, like, if you were like, who wears the pants, she'd be like Sabia, right? But like my girl is more masculine appearing, so people think that she's like the more, we have our own ideas of what masculinity looks like and femininity, whatever. But like my girl is definitely like, she becomes more dominant in the space of like care, right? Like she's like, lay down, put your feet up, but sometimes like it's an order. It's not, she's not asking me, and I'm like, who are you talking to? But at the same time, she's like, I'm not scared. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll just lay down, you know? Like, I'm gonna give her a little fight because who are you talking to, right? To make myself feel better. But she's like, cute, lay down, right? But then it's like, different areas, right? Sexually, I'm more dominant, but home life, like we talk about like home life, right? Like, I think me personally, like, I'm like, wow, you can just like manage a home. Like, that to me is like so amazing because I can't do it. And I think there's so much dominance in that. And people put femininity as something they always try to equate femininity with submission. And I don't think that. Like, someone that could run a home and run some kids, babe, you dominating to me. Because you hold these kids down, tell them what to do, get them on their schedules and do all of that, babe. You are dominating for me. The person who was like, people generally put like, they're making the money. I'm like, but they're dominant because they have more money. But what is their function? Their functionality is not very dominant to me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, you're
providing. Going to work, working for somebody, have to show up at a certain time. They're just following the rules.
You're contributing to the household for the real boss. Because real boss is the person who's running that household. And I know for me, it's like, oh, let me get out the way. Oh, this is how this go? Let me get out the way. Right? So it's like, it does kind of flip and flop and do those things. And I think it's also about like giving, I would say like, it's about also playing with that, right? Because there's dominant, submissive, and then there's like switch, right? And so a switch is a person who knows they are very much evidently leaning one way or the other. Like, they may be dominant in one dynamic. They might be submissive in one dynamic, or they might be in a relationship where they both switch back and forth depending on what they agreed on for the day, right? But that also takes communication. How are you feeling today, right? Because like, for me, because there's also burnout on both sides. It's burnout to be like the quote unquote submissive, feminine type, motherly type, nurturing type, the one that can take direction, whatever the case that they say. There's a burnout that comes to that too. So we have to like be able to exercise this kind of give and take, right? Because you can be put in that position. And I think the motherly, feminine archetype, people just put a lot of like submission to that. And I think that's very dominant, and people get burned out because they're always in that space. And it's very exhausting to always have to give direction, to always have to figure it out, to have to figure out what's for dinner, to figure out what's for lunch, to figure out what time the baby got to be at school, to figure out what the outfit going to be for the Christmas special, to figure out what what I mean? Like, there's a very exhausting space of always making all these decisions. And I think decision making, when a person is mostly in a decision making space, I feel like that's very dominant. Does that make sense? Where like a lot of people opposite that. They're like, oh, the person making the money who has a schedule to follow, that knows exactly what they're going to do at work, who knows whatever. And I'm like, well, what about the person who's dealing with these dynamic little kids at home, and this baby who was like, yesterday at 12, they wanted peas. Today, they don't like peas. They want carrots. And like, like that to me is like, yo, how do we hold both of those? And also say like, one is not more exhausting than the other. One is better than the other. But how do we communicate and be like, yo, what do you need today?
Right.
Well, I think you made the point perfectly with your client who liked to be tickled. It's like, yeah, to the whole exterior world, he's probably like, I lean dominant. I'm CEO of, the universe, and do all these masculine things. And probably because the space is pushed so hard to make all those decisions, then he's quote unquote a submissive. That's only one little area of tickling or fetish or whatever. So it does make sense that it kind of flows between different categories, but I bet you the categories kind of stay consistent.
They kind of stay consistent for sure. I think, and there are some that switch. Like, they're very much like, they know, like, I kind of go in and out between, depending on the day, right? Like, depending on my mood, depending on the factors, right? I would say that I am more submissive when I'm in a stressed out state in my home, right? My girl has to take care of me. There is no decision making. I'm too burnt out to make decisions. But figure out dinner, you figure it out. Like that's definitely a part of it, right? But then it's like, but even in that stressed out state, when I'm at work, I'm more dominant because I got to get it together, right? Because it's too stressful. So now I have to make decisions. I got to make structure. I got to do these things. So it's like, there has to be balance. I don't think anyone should lean on one side or the other all the time.
Yeah, how do you get more balance? Because I feel like all of this would operate very well in a partnership where there's excellent communication, plenty of emotional trust, lots of check-ins, where people both have the skills, but that's not always
For sure.
the way marriages are set up when, or, you know, relationships when kids are brought into the picture. And we find, and I found, you know, personally, I mean, I'm speaking mostly for myself here, but we've found a lot of patterns too in other people that we've talked to where postpartum itself is almost like what starts because it's so,
it starts the breakdown.
It starts the breakdown. And then when you're in it, you have to kind of start solving all of these problems. So like,
sure. And I think like, you know, some of us are more privileged, right? Because I think I say all the time as a like doing postpartum doula work. When I was doing postpartum doula work heavily, I was working with twins all the time. Like that was just like they just magically appeared always twins. And I'm like, damn, it's two of y'all with two different personalities and two different needs and two different whatever. And you have, you know, these two parents at the house who are trying to like figure it out. And like, it's very complicated. And of course you see the breakdown, right? Especially as a doula. So I think there's like, like things that people can put in place. And some of it comes with privilege, right? Like having a doula at your house, that's not free. It's just not, right? So it's like having a doula sometimes is, I always say, like, I feel like I've saved some marriages for sure. Like I'm confident that like me being
I
married,
believe it.
some marriages because they were just like, somebody has got to figure it out and it's not going to be us, right? Because it's also a territory that people don't even know what they're figuring out. What am I figuring out? Like, I know it's just a mess here, but like, what am I figuring out beyond feed the baby, make sure the baby is this? But it's like, no, you're figuring out like who are y'all now as a threesome, 4, 5, 6, how many people now is in the household, right? And so there's like those things, and we can talk about like therapy and all these things, right? But I would say that in a more accessible way, in my experience, the people that have kind of moved through postpartum, and mind you, I'm coming from a doula perspective, right? Of just being in people's homes, listening, whatever the case may be. Like the ones that have maybe moved through postpartum with the least amount of scratches and bumps, because they're gonna be there no matter what, have been the people that prioritize just a 5-minute check-in. Just a 5-minute check-in, not something we got to sit down at the table and curate the experience. And like, no, not even that. Just even if it's in a text message, right? Just something about how are you today? What is your energy level today? Where do you need support? And asking the other person the same thing. Sometimes you realize that somebody is way more energized today and they're like, oh, I can take this on. Oh, you're really tired today. I can take this thing, or I can do bath time with, you know, little Tommy, and I can do that. Even if that's not my regular thing that I do every day. And then sometimes you realize, you know, this person can take on the cooking, or this person can take on the this, or this person's really craving some time together, right? They're really craving just like putting their kids to sleep and laying in the bed and just watching a show together. But I think a lot of times people get so caught in, because part of postpartum is like building a routine, right?
Yeah.
Like, right? It's building the routine. And that's fine because we want structure, right? But anytime anything leans just one way, it always creates gaps, right? And it stops the communication of we're dynamic people, right? We're just people, we're dynamic. So now we have the structure that we're so happy that we've gotten to, right? I know this, you come home, you do this, but it doesn't speak to what do you need today? Right. Right? We get lost in the structure, and the structure becomes the thing that actually starts pulling us apart.
Right.
Because we're so stuck in the structure that we're not seeing each other as individuals that are having feelings and moving through things. Or maybe the structure is just like, usually you do bath time and I really enjoy doing bath time with them, but because of the structure, I never get to do the bath time. Or maybe the structure is you cook before I get home, but I really miss us cooking together. And I wish it was, you know, a weekend time that we could cook together. Right. But people get lost in the structure, and it's fine. I think, you know, the way that we kind of teach people to parent, like all the focus has to go on the children. Children need structure, right? But I think that the actual adults are so dynamic that they forget that piece of it. And now we become autopilot, and now we don't recognize each other.
Right. It's almost like part of the structure should be allowing for not only flexibility, but also like the check-ins and the analyzing the dynamic.
Yeah, and the BDSM part of it would be okay, we know that we do need some structure. We can't just have kids doing whatever, right? Like they need structure. Okay. The conversation would be, where can we allow for space for us to be dynamic, right? And that might be that on Monday through Friday, we don't got time for that. Everybody gotta do what they gotta do. Everybody gotta go to school, they gotta do this, gotta do this. But on Saturday, we can allow for more of that wiggle room. We can allow for more space. We can allow for the kids to sleep in more, or for them to stay up a little bit later, or for us to stay up late, right? Like, where can we put that in? Because that's something that I'm missing. That's something that I need.
It's almost like the like play side of it, sort of.
Mhm.
Or like
Exactly.
the
That's
fun
what,
side.
that's literally what BDSM is and kink is. It's like, it's literally our time that we say like we're, indulging whatever we indulge in. It's called play, right?
Uh-huh.
Like that's literally the word for it is play. And there's a lot of serious aspects to BDSM, right? Consent, right? Getting very like enthusiastic consent, not just a head nod, not just no, like are you sure? Right? Like, what does this mean for you? Right? There's a part of having these really deep conversations. There's a part of recognizing trauma. There's a part of, learning your body. What is a space for you that's good? What space that's not good for you? Things that come up, feelings, tears, everything, right? Very, very serious, right? But then it's like when we get through that, now we have time for this play space, right? And I think what happens is like in relationship, just think about like everyone's regular just relationship with friends, relationships, whatever. We go into play first, and then we realize that people have trauma later, right? Then
Mhm.
we figure out like, oh, the way I touched you on your back was actually not something that you liked, but I thought you did, and you act like you did because you felt like you had to, because, right? Like it's like the opposite. We go into like all these serious, we have kids. People have kids, and this is no shade to anybody, but we have kids with people and we don't know how they parent. Right. And like where BDSM is like the opposite, was like, well, let's talk about our future plans. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
what does it mean? Like, what have you learned from your parents? What do you want to take from them? What do you want to leave behind? How would you react to our kid doing this? How would you react to this? Here's my like red flags, green flags. This is what I'm not going to deal with. What's yours? Right. Like, that's how it's like BDSM is like, let's get right into it. Okay. Let's cut the small talk. Let's cut the mask that we put on. And then when we get all through that, then let's have some fun.
Totally.
Yeah.
I feel like we could probably talk another 7 hours, but I know we can't. For those listeners who just really felt connected to the words you were saying, like how can they know more about you or participate with you or learn more about BDSM?
I need to do my like kink as a liberative tool for parents. I need to do that publicly. That make me think about that. I did it for a conference about sexuality and like parenthood. But I need to make that happen like for the public because it's such a fun conversation.
Yeah.
But I would say find me, Sabia Wade, pretty much everywhere. My main channels, I would say, is Instagram because I am a millennial. So I feel like millennials kind of like stay on Instagram as far as we go. And then Sabia Wade is my website. And then, yeah, always able to reach out to me, ask questions, ask for resources. Like, I'm always down for that.
I love it. I love it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for chatting with us. I learned so much. You have so much wisdom, and I'm going to be thinking about kink all day.
You should.
And probably the rest of the week, and doing some research on this because I think it really has a lot of value and value that is really missing from modern relationships, especially like heteronormative ones. And I mean, I'm divorced, so I can't, my story is not as, happy, but I think it's so empowering. And I think that the work that you do is so badass.
Just so you know, one person I met actually when I was doing this kink conversation, she actually got divorced. I think she had a baby. She got divorced, and it wasn't working out. Everything postpartum, right? Tore it up. It was over. It was over. And then, which happens, like that's a real thing. And then she, like, after she broke up, whatever, she was like, I'm just gonna go and just have fun, right? So she met a dom, just like exploring herself, met a dom, and learned a lot about consent and safety and her body and like all these things. And now they're married.
There's your
That's
solution, Megan. You got
that's
it.
great.
Yeah, I think you need to go find a dom.
I don't rule anything out, okay? It's a new world for me right now. It's a new world. Taking notes.
All right. Well, man, I learned so much and I can't wait to just continue the conversation. I know I'll be thinking about this a lot too. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sabia.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future conversations. And follow us on Instagram at Raising Mama Podcast for more updates, resources, and a peek behind the scenes. See you next time.